All right, if you're just joining us, we are jumping right back into where we left off. This is Robert Hur's testimony before Congress.
I will yield to
Just real quick, Mr. Hurd, someone earlier said, said something about changing the facts. You said, I'm not going to change the facts, but let's keep the facts the same, but change the subject. If you had the same facts and the individual that you were investigating was 65 and had a good memory, do you reach the same conclusion?
Congressman, as I responded earlier to a question along these lines, I am not here to entertain hypotheticals about facts or circumstances that may be different. What I did was assess the evidence and the facts that I obtained in this investigation and make a judgment based on this set of evidence.
Fair enough. The chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Washington for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Special Counsel Hur, thank you for being here. Thank you for your work. In your investigation, you reviewed more than 7 million documents and conducted 173 interviews of 147 witnesses, including President Biden. Is that correct?
Yes, Congresswoman.
And your 15-month investigation cost several $1 million and resulted in a comprehensive 345-page report with several dozen pages of appendices. Is it correct that, as it says in the first sentence of your executive summary, that your investigation concluded with an assessment that, quote, no criminal charges are warranted in this matter?
Correct.
So this lengthy, expensive, and independent investigation resulted in a complete exoneration of President Joe Biden. For every document you discussed in your report, you found insufficient evidence that the president violated any laws about possession or retention of classified materials. The primary law that you analyzed for potential prosecution was part of the Espionage Act, 18 U.S.C. 793E, which criminalizes willful retention or disclosure of national defense information. Is that correct?
Congresswoman, that is one statute that we analyzed. I need to go back and make sure that I take note of a word that you used, exoneration. That is not a word
Mr. Hur, I'm going to continue with my questions. I'm going to continue with my questions. I know that the term
I ultimately reached
I know that
whether
the term
sufficient evidence existed such that the likely outcome
you exonerated
would be a conviction.
I know that
did
the
not
term
exonerate him.
willful
That word does not appear in
retention
the
has a
report, Congress.
Mr. Hur, it's my time. Thank you. I know that the term willful retention has a particular legal meaning, and I want to make sure that that meaning is absolutely clear to the American people before we go any further. As you wrote in your report, to prove as a matter of law that the president, quote, willfully retained any documents, you would need to prove beyond a reasonable doubt 2 elements. First, that the president knowingly retained or disclosed national defense information, and second, that he knew that this conduct was unlawful. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And to be very,
and I'm sorry, Congressman, that it was national defense information. That's an important third element.
Okay, thank you. To be very, very clear, you did not find sufficient evidence to prove either of those elements beyond a reasonable doubt to show that Mr. Biden willfully retained any of the classified national defense materials that were recovered during your investigation, correct?
My conclusion was that the admissible evidence was not sufficient to make conviction at trial a probable outcome.
Not sufficient. Thank you. Let me ask you about a few specific examples so the American people are clear. One set of documents was discovered by investigators in the president's Delaware home. His staff had assembled those documents into binders in 2014 to prepare him for an event with Charlie Rose. Some of the documents in those binders were marked classified. You reviewed all of the facts surrounding the classified documents in those binders, and you determined, and this is a quote from your report, these facts do not support a conclusion that Mr. Biden willfully retained the marked classified documents in these binders, correct?
That language does appear in the report.
You also reviewed another set of classified documents from the president's home related to the Afghanistan troop surge in 2009, and you evaluated whether the president willfully retained such documents in his Delaware home or a home that he rented in Virginia in 2017. In your report, you said that there was, quote, a shortage of evidence, end quote, for any wrongdoing, and, quote, other innocent explanations for the documents that we cannot refute, end quote. Are those quotes correct?
Congresswoman, if you have particular page sites for those quotations, I'd be happy to confirm their
Page
accuracy.
6. It's right up on the screen.
With respect to the 2 quotes that are on the screen, in addition to this shortage of evidence, there are other innocent explanations for documents we cannot refute, and we conclude the evidence is not sufficient to convict, and we decline to recommend prosecution.
I was just going to get to that, and you concluded that, quote, the evidence is not sufficient to convict, and we decline to recommend prosecution, end quote. Those are your words in the report, correct?
Those words appear in the report.
Thank you. President Biden's counsel discovered a different set of documents at the Penn Biden Center and voluntarily turned them over to the FBI. Those documents contain national security information, but you determined that you could not, in fact, prove that President Biden willfully retained those documents because, quote, the evidence suggests that the marked classified documents found at the Penn Biden Center were sent and kept there by mistake. Therefore, we decline any criminal charges related to those documents, end quote, correct?
The language, "we decline any criminal charges related to those documents," does appear at page 311 of the report.
Thank you. You also reached a similar conclusion regarding the documents found in President Biden's Senate papers at the University of Delaware. Quote, for these reasons, it is likely that the few classified documents found in Mr. Biden's Senate papers at the University of Delaware were there by mistake, correct?
That language does appear at page 325 of the report.
So it seems to me that the crux of the report, the main story, is that you found insufficient evidence to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that President Biden willfully retained any classified materials. That is the story of this report. And I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
The gentlelady yields back. The gentlelady from Indiana is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just thank you, Special Counsel, for being here in these challenging times. And I want to tell you a few things that is interesting for me. You obviously could see that there is a motive, there is a legacy. You obviously see that it was a willful retention of these documents, but it's interesting for me that when you talk about sympathetic, well-meaning older man with poor, elderly man with a poor memory, it seems like every attorney would advise you to be sympathetic and be well-meaning, and it seems like the whole FBI needs to do based on my hearings here, I need to do check on amnesia because everyone says doesn't recall. So it seems to me that it might have been something way more in his recollection. There's a typical I don't recall, because that's what everything's like. That's I've learned it here. So is there something more than that just I don't recall something for you to actually decide? Because it seems that this is the core of the whole investigation. Why didn't you pursue further the charges?
Congresswoman, my judgment as to how a jury would likely perceive and receive and consider evidence relating to all the evidence that would be put in by both the government and the defense at trial. It was based on a number of different sources, from documents, including various recordings, some of them from the 2016-2017 timeframe, some from our interview with the president in October of 2023. I think what you're asking about specifically is how the president presented himself during his interview in October of last year. And of course, I did take into account not just the words from the cold record of the transcript, but the entire manner in living color in real time of how the president presented himself during his interview.
Hopefully he didn't outsmart you and all of us. But before I yield, I just wanted to actually just comment on something, Mr. Raskin mentioned about, us not remembering communists. I actually grew up under communists, and I have a very good recollection what it is. And unfortunately, Tyrann's eye on the rise, on the march, which he said, unfortunately, they've been emboldened by, President Obama, now by President Biden too. And unfortunately, our government and Department of Justice is really now resembles, a tyrannical government. It's sad for me to see that, but I'm going, and with a really double standard what we have there, but I'm going to yield to Chairman Jordan the rest of my time.
Thank the gentlelady for yielding. Mr. Hurt, during your one-year investigation, did you have communications with the White House and the White House counsel in particular?
Yes.
I think you had I got 5 letters that they and they communicated with you regarding your investigation. Is that accurate?
We received a number of letters from White House counsel's office, and as well as the president's personal counsel.
Right, they're either special counsel or personal counsel. I see who signed the letters. And did the White House get the report before the report was made public?
We did provide a draft of the report to the White House counsel's office and members of the president's personal counsel team for their review.
No, I understand. And did the White House then, once they got the report before it went public, did the White House try to weigh in with your investigation on elements of that report and frankly get the report changed?
They did request certain edits and changes to the draft report.
Yeah, I see that in the February 5th letter. Did they only correspond with you?
I'm sorry, Congressman, are you asking if they corresponded with anyone else on my team?
Once you gave the report to the White House,
yes,
they saw changes. I have one letter here that's addressed to you on February 5th, and they said, we're pleased that after more of a year of investigating, you've determined, they respond to the report. And then they disagree with they asked for you to change some of the things you had in your report, namely the fact that the president's memory was not very good. You remember that?
Yes, sir.
Okay, but I also have 2 other letters one on February 7th to Merrick Garland, where they raised the same concern, and then on February 12th, where they go to the DAG. Bradley Weinsheimer. You familiar with those?
I am familiar with those letters. Bradley Weinsheimer is an assistant or associate deputy attorney general.
Right, Associate DAG, the ADAG, right?
Yes.
And Merrick Garland, of course, is the Attorney General. So you're
Yes, he
familiar
is.
with the fact that they went over your head?
They were certainly entitled to write whatever letters they wished to Mr. Weinsheimer and to the attorney general.
I just find that interesting. You know, the White House they're communicating with you throughout this 1-year investigation, and then the White House says, "Oh, we're gonna go to the principal's office, and we're gonna talk about Mr. Herr's report." Do you find that interesting?
As I said, they were free to correspond with whomever in the federal government they wished to correspond with. I did engage in numerous communications with them during the course of the investigation, and as is reflected in the special counsel regulations, the Attorney General did provide oversight of my investigation.
Understand. I thank the gentlelady for yielding and yield back. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from California for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Jordan. I want to first say that the House Judiciary Committee is responsible for helping to enforce the rule of law. Unfortunately, the actions of this chairman in ignoring a bipartisan congressional subpoena have damaged the ability of this committee to get information from witnesses and damage the rule of law. Now, Mr. Herr, thank you for being here today. Thank you for sharing your compelling immigrant story. That just goes to highlight how America is a nation of immigrants. I'm going to ask you a series of questions, yes and no questions. They are not trick questions. They're simply designed to highlight what you already found in your report, which is that there are, quote, material distinctions, end quote, between President Biden's case and Mr. Trump's case. So here's my first question. In your investigation, did you find that President Biden directed his lawyer to lie to the FBI?
We identified no such evidence.
Did you find that President Biden directed his lawyer to destroy classified documents?
No.
Did you find that President Biden directed his personal assistant to move boxes of documents to hide them from the FBI?
No.
Did you find that President Biden directed his personal assistant to delete security camera footage after the FBI asked for that footage?
No.
Did you find that President Biden showed a classified map related to an ongoing military operation to a campaign aide who did not have clearance?
No.
Did you find that President Biden engaged in a conspiracy to obstruct justice?
No.
Did you find that President Biden engaged in a scheme to conceal?
No.
Each of the activities I just laid out describe what Donald Trump did in his willful mishandling of classified information and his criminal efforts to deceive the FBI. In contrast, President Biden handed over documents without delay and complied fully with investigators. Mr. Herr, in your report, you write that, quote, according to the indictment, Trump not only refused to return the documents for many months, but he also obstructed justice by enlisting others to destroy evidence and then to lie about it, end quote. You also say that if proven, these would be, quote, serious aggravating facts, end quote. Do you still stand by your analysis?
I do.
I have a few more questions as well. In your investigation, did you find that President Biden set up a shell company and covertly paid $130,000 in hush money to an adult porn star?
No.
Did you find that President Biden directed his lawyer to pay $150,000 in hush money to a former Playboy model?
No.
In your investigation, did you find that President Biden called the Georgia Secretary of State to demand that he, quote, find 11,780 votes?
No.
Did you find that President Biden devised a scheme to organize a slate of fake electors to undermine a free and fair election?
No.
Did you find that leading up to January 6, 2021, President Biden urged his supporters to travel to D.C. and to storm the Capitol?
No.
Thank you. Each of these activities I laid out describe what Donald Trump did, his efforts to bully election officials, overturn the results of the election, and deceive the American people. That is why Donald Trump has been indicted in not just one, not just two, not just three, but 4 criminal cases. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Wisconsin is recognized for 5 minutes.
I just want to go do a little repetition, Mr. Herr, in regards to the chairman's questions from a few minutes ago. So is it correct on that February 5th letter that was sent to you asking you to change references to the president's poor memory? Wasn't there a request by the White House to do that?
There was a request, yes.
And Mr. Chairman, I think the record should show that the gentleman from Maryland earlier said that that was not the case. I think he said, nor did he seek to redact a single word of Herr's report. Obviously, Mr. Herr is telling us differently here. And didn't the White House then go to the Attorney General himself and say that he would like to see changes to the references in regards to the president's memory?
The White House counsel did send such a letter.
So if this president was 60 years old rather than 80 years old, would you prosecute him?
Congressman, as I've said before, I cannot engage in hypotheticals. I address the facts and the evidence as I found them in
There
this
was an
matter.
80-year-old grandma that came to Washington, D.C. a few years ago, did not commit a violent crime, committed a crime, but did not commit a violent crime, and she was fully prosecuted. Doesn't that seem like it's a dual system of justice where the president is above the law?
Congressman, I don't know the facts and the details of this other case that you're referencing with this other person.
You say that the president is unlikely to reoffend in the future. I believe that was a quote that you put in the report. Is that
I
correct?
believe that's in Chapter 13.
How so? How is he unlikely to reoffend in the future? How do you come to that judgment?
As I say on page 254, any deterrent effect of prosecution would likely be slight. We are not concerned with specific deterrence, as we see little risk he will reoffend.
Well, isn't it because he's now the president and he has almost unlimited authority to release documents? Isn't that correct? I mean, as a vice president, he didn't have that authority. Now that he's president, isn't it easy to say that he's unlikely to reoffend because he's got almost unlimited authority to release these documents?
Well, that statement was based on that assessment of the likeliness of reoffending from this particular person, President Biden, is based on a number of factors, including the authority that he has now with respect to classified materials, as well as the experience that he's had going through a special counsel investigation.
Yeah, but look back at 2011. There were multiple instances where he was informed by his staff and they ratcheted it up to where there was a formal process. You're saying he's learned from that when he's proven that he hasn't? I mean, that goes all the way back to 2011.
Congressman, what I'm saying in the report at page 254 is that
He's a repeat offender, Mr. Herr, isn't he?
what I say.
I'll move on to something else here. You said he had strong motivations to ignore the proper procedures for safeguarding classified information, and he provided raw material to his ghostwriter that would be of interest to prospective readers and buyers of his book. And I think you said something about he viewed himself as a historic figure, correct?
I believe those words do all appear in the report.
Yeah, and he was also doing this for business purposes, that there may be people that would want to buy his book.
Towards the end of his vice presidency, Mr. Biden had resolved to write a book and began work on it towards the end of his vice presidency.
You know, I think, Mr. Chairman, this is really consistent with the Biden family when you look at them in trying to enrich themselves. I mean, you're familiar with the work that the Oversight
My
Committee has
kids
done
are-
over the last year, right?
I have read.
You
some
might be
reports.
able to hear my
I mean-
kids at this point. They're home and going nuts. So I think that's probably a good place to leave it off for now. You know, maybe I'll find some clips from this thing and get back to it. But hey, if you haven't already, please subscribe. I'm going to be doing this more and more and more. If the kids shut up, then I can keep going. But gosh, you know what I say? Remember, knowledge is power. Subscribe for more. I'd really appreciate it if you did. I'm on my way to 1,000 subscribers. We're at 600, so every subscriber counts. Thank you so much for joining us today.